From Saw grossing over 80 times its budget as Wan's first ever project, to his talent now being eyed by Warner Brothers for a Dead Space live-action movie franchise. Here are some facts you never knew about James Wan. His Hollywood journey started with the Saw films in the early 2000s. At the time, he was only messing around with the horror thriller concept. It was him, along with a bunch of his friends, and as they were chilling in America, they came up with the most gore-filled idea for a film. Before you knew it, they had a script ready, and they were gonna shoot it. But there was a big problem. Wan was almost entirely broke, and the film was shot with no budget at all. Seeing how chaotic the creative process was, he was convinced that the film would fail to leave a mark. But, as it turns out, the budget didn't matter. Saw was a giant hit. Not only did it do well in his hometown, but it also broke some insane records internationally. The first Saw film grossed $55 million in America, while in other countries, it managed to make a total of $48 million. The worldwide sales totaled more than $100 million, which was 80 times more than what they put into the film's production. Of course, the studio couldn't let the profits slip away, so they decided to make a franchise out of it. And throughout the early 2000s, Wan was an executive producer for every Saw sequel to come. But there's a reason why his very first project made the entire world go crazy, and it has everything to do with his big presence. Leonetti was the director of photography on Dead Silence, which was Wan's first project after Saw's groundbreaking success. Not only did Dead Silence flop in the most tragic way possible, but almost everybody forgot about it, as it was left sandwiched between Wan's two beloved projects, Saw and Insidious. But in Leonetti's eyes, what made the guy's work so special was his presence in the idea. Whenever he'd be on set, it was clear that he had the most unique way of looking at things. Even though Dead Silence came out at a super early stage of his career, it still showed the man's vision as clear as day, especially when looking at the craziest weapons in the film's arsenal. Wan loves dolls, and he's not gonna hide it. Kids own loads of them, and although they're supposed to be harmless playthings, the director of Dead Silence sees them differently. Leonetti explained how James sees the creepiness in dolls, which clearly shows in how he designed them for the film. I mean, the story is all about Shaw's spirit haunting the village, where she was buried alongside all 101 of her dolls. Of course, Wan took the opportunity to go crazy with the plot, and Roberts recalled how the dolls gave the set a brilliant look. But that's not all. The visual aesthetics screamed James Wan. And everybody who has worked with him has learned to appreciate his way of crafting scenes and making them his own. Just look at one of his most recent projects. He co-wrote and produced the horror thriller Megan, based on the terrifying story of an artificially intelligent doll. And though Gerard Johnstone directs the film, it still draws on Wan's obsession with creepy things like dolls, puppets, and toys. Megan walks in the same shoes as Saw's Billy the Puppet, and you could easily compare it to Dead Silence's various puppets, as well as the famed Annabelle doll from the Warrens' Occult Museum. But despite his unforgettable style, Dead Silence fell flat with both critics and the audience. So how did the man pick himself back up again? 2010's Insidious was a major turning point in Wan's horror career. Saw was seen as Wan's tribute to David Lynch's Seven, but Insidious was his legendary take on Poltergeist, a horror film that terrorized suburban American families. For starters, it brought a very terrifying film demon into the scene, one that resembled Darth Maul from Star Wars, and it also allowed Wan to collaborate with Scream Queen icon Lin Shaye. Not to mention, through Insidious, he met Patrick Wilson, who went on to work with Wan on The Conjuring and Aquaman, eventually becoming his lucky charm. Not only was Insidious a financial success, but Wan once again proved his ability to provide unending horror thrills on a small budget. Think about it. When Saw came out, he was a relatively new name in the industry. But with Insidious' success, the man finally got himself a throne to sit on. The film spawned 3 sequels, with a 4th on the way, and soon he was branded the King of Horror. But because he was so passionate about the genre, he couldn't just sit tight after one big success. Malignant was Wan's most erratic creation to date, and it was all on purpose. Although it boggled the minds of fans and critics alike, it was one of the most well-planned horror projects in a while. Sure, some thought it was a brilliantly executed joke, but others loved Wan's outrageously imaginative approach to horror. Heck, even Wan admitted that he went crazy with the film, creating it as a blend of like 5 different genres. He mentioned how it's based on all the things he's been influenced by, and he even took a dive back into his childhood, recalling the science fiction horror and psychological thriller films he used to be into. It's clear he wanted this project to be all over the place. And whether fans were along for the trip or not, Wan carved his own unique little branch in the horror genre with this film. But I bet you didn't know that he hasn't always been doing the same thing. In fact, right after Insidious, the director took a well-deserved break. In 2013, Wan started working on Fast and Furious 7, which was a direct downshift from horror. While talking about it, he said that he's a junkie when it comes to action films, and the project excited him beyond limits. Plus, he always wanted to try new things, and an action movie about cars was something he hadn't tried before. He opened up about how people think he can only do one genre, reducing him to a horror fan. But boy, does that bother him. Hollywood loves to typecast filmmakers, and by taking on projects like Fast and Furious, he wanted to show people that he likes other things too. Wan was aware of the franchise's massive fan base and box office success, as director Justin Lin's Fast and Furious 6 alone grossed over $236 million. But he knew that he could leave a mark, bringing in the same suspense and tension that he loves in horror films. And he wasn't wrong. Referring to the first Die Hard, he recalled how suspenseful the story was, and how could the scary set pieces not have caught Wan's eye? That was exactly what he wanted to bring into the franchise. And even though he was probably tempted to throw a creepy puppet in there, James did the most fantastic job at nailing it. What's more, this wasn't the only time he's taken a break. It looks like taking time off to chill helps the guy make better stuff. Because after the failure of Dead Silence, he took a few years before he came up with Insidious. And of course it blew up, but like any other genre enthusiast, the horror king always comes back to what he loves most, and his passion isn't just limited to his own ideas. The Conjuring director said he'd love to remake Chopping Mall. The 1986 cult classic is a techno-horror slasher movie directed by Jim Wynorski, and it shows 8 teens trapped in a mall with a very interesting security system. The film kinda flopped when it first came to theaters, but it was way ahead of its time. Over the years, it has gathered a cult following, and Wan is a proud part of it. He spoke about how much he loves fun horror films, because while it's spooky and full of suspense, some of the moments are just funny. If Wan got to remake Chopping Mall, not only would he get to work with a story he enjoys, but he would also add his own twist to it. Even if that never ends up happening though, there's no need to worry, because one of his greatest projects might be in the works right now. Dead Space is set to be directed by James Wan, and fans are losing it. This project's gonna be the next big science fiction horror franchise, and nothing could make it better than having the Insidious director on board to direct it for the big screen. Based on the world-famous video game, the movie has been in the works since 2013, but there was no information on its development. Thanks to John Carpenter's confirmation, Warner Brothers have another director involved in the process. And it's none other than Wan. As a man who simply can't let himself be bound to one genre, he'll bring an extraordinary perspective to the table. Trust me, this will be the greatest moment in Wan's entire career. So, there you have it. From his talent now being eyed by Warner Brothers for a Dead Space live-action movie franchise, to Saw grossing over 80 times its budget as Wan's first ever project. Those were all the facts you never knew about James Wan.